Back off, monkey. That white coat won't make you human. That was the first thing he said to me. Not a warning. Not a misunderstanding. Just hate. And 30 seconds later, he was out cold on the pavement, because I reminded him what it means to mess with the wrong black woman. Before we begin, this story is a fictional retelling inspired by real events, crafted to reflect the kind of injustice too many people of color experience every single day. You're watching Underrated Black Voices, a channel where we bring you gripping, thought-provoking stories of resilience, justice, and the untold power behind underestimated black lives. If this hits you in the gut or heart, don't just scroll. Stay till the end. You'll want to. I had just walked out of the ER after a 16-hour trauma shift. My hands were still trembling from stitching up a child who'd flown through a windshield, and my back was screaming from hunching over the operating table for most of the day. I was in my scrubs. No white coat, no fancy heels, just the pure exhaustion that comes from saving lives without a break. My hair was tied back, my face bare, my ID badge still clipped to my top. I wasn't thinking about race or respect or anything except grabbing a bottle of water from the gas station before I collapsed at home. It was 2:13 a.m. The parking lot was empty, lit by a single flickering lamp near the pumps. I barely registered the police cruiser idling by the curb. Just as I reached the front doors of the station, the window rolled down. "Back off, monkey," the cop barked, his voice smug and full of something uglier than authority. "That white coat won't make you human." I froze. The water bottle in my hand slipped back into the cooler with a hollow splash. I turned slowly, thinking maybe, he'd mistaken me for someone else. I reached for the badge clipped to my scrubs and held it up in the air, offering the most non-threatening gesture I could. "Sir, I'm a doctor. Just getting water before heading home." But he didn't want explanations. He wanted dominance. The driver's door flew open, and he stormed toward me like he had something to prove. He wasn't some rookie, either. This man had age in his shoulders and arrogance in his stride. "You think you're somebody," he shouted. "You're nothing but street trash in costume. What hospital would hire a thing like you?" He stepped in closer. His breath reeked of fast food and bitterness. His hand hovered near his belt, right where his baton and taser sat. I've seen that look before in patients who come in after police beatings. I've stitched it out of bruised flesh and broken skulls. That's when instinct took over. Not anger. Not revenge. Pure survival. His hand twitched, and I struck. One punch. That's all. His knees buckled. His head hit the pavement like a dropped sack of bricks. For a second, time stopped. The only sound was the dull thud of his body against the curb. I stared down at my fist. My knuckles barely stung. Across the street, a small urgent care clinic was still open. A nurse in blue scrubs screamed and rushed out, her phone already in hand. Another nurse followed. I recognized both of them. We'd shared patients before. The first one gasped as she stopped next to me. "Oh my God, that's Dr. Ellis, head of neurosurgery." More voices. Lights flickered on. Someone called for backup. And before I could even breathe, another squad car was pulling in, red and blue lights chasing away the darkness. The new officer stepped out, taller, younger, unsure. He looked at me, then at the badge still clipped to my chest. "Dr. Maya Ellis?" he asked slowly. I nodded. Yes. His face changed. The hostility vanished like someone flipped a switch. He bent over to check the unconscious officer, then radioed for EMS. The nurse who'd recognized me gave her witness statement, voice trembling but firm. I didn't run. I didn't protest. I stood there, still in my scrubs, still shaking. 15 minutes later, a supervisor arrived. An internal affairs rep followed before dawn. By 9 a.m., the cop who called me a monkey was suspended pending investigation. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Because 3 hours after dropping that man to the pavement, I walked into O3 and drilled into a 9-year-old skull to relieve brain pressure from a subdural hematoma. Her father cried when I told him she'd live. That night, I saved a life. But for 30 seconds, I chose to save my own. There's something no one tells you about being a black trauma surgeon at the top of your game. How even after all the degrees, all the late nights, all the children you save, one ignorant man with a badge can still try to erase your humanity in a parking lot at 2 a.m. That morning, I didn't go home. I couldn't. I was still wired, still shaking. Not from fear, but from the weight of what just happened. I walked back into the hospital like nothing had happened, past the security guards who nodded with quiet respect, past the nurses who whispered in hallways after they'd seen the news alert. They knew. It was already out there. Off-duty neurosurgeon knocks out cop in self-defense. I didn't say a word. I scrubbed in for surgery, adjusted the lights, and guided a team through a procedure that would have broken most people. I stood for 4 hours holding a girl's future in my hands. When it was over and she was stable, I finally sat down in the locker room and let myself feel something. I didn't cry. Not then. But I stared at my reflection in the mirror, that same face the cop had spat on with his words. The same skin he said wasn't worthy of the white coat. I thought of my mother's hands braiding my hair when I was a child, whispering, "You'll have to be twice as good just to be seen as enough." I didn't know how right she was until last night. The hospital administrator called a few hours later. She wasn't just my boss. Dr. Elaine Moreland had been my mentor since I walked into this place fresh out of residency. A black woman herself, she'd built her legacy brick by brick with grit, grace, and the kind of unwavering professionalism that kept people from questioning her worth, even when they still did. "Maya," she said carefully. "You good?" "I'm functional," I answered. There was silence on the line, the kind that means someone's weighing whether to speak as a boss or as a sister. She chose both. "I saw the footage," she said. "Security cam picked up everything. There's already a media firestorm brewing, but we've got your back. Legal's involved. HR. The union." "I don't care about the media," I replied. "I care about that little girl we just saved. I care about walking into a gas station without being told I'm not human." Elaine sighed, deep and steady. "It's not fair. But I'm proud of you. You didn't flinch. You stood your ground. I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted water." That's when she said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes, Maya, we don't choose the moment. The moment chooses us." That night, it wasn't the hospital press team or even legal that contacted me next. It was the Internal Affairs Bureau. A man named Captain Bryce showed up in plain clothes with a tight expression and a recorder in hand. We met in the admin wing, away from cameras, away from gossip. He was polite, but clinical. No warmth. No sympathy. "I'm here to collect a statement," he said, pressing record. "You're not under investigation. But we need to get your account on record." I nodded. "Fine. Let's begin." I told him everything. From the second I stepped out of my car to the moment that officer's head hit the pavement. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. He paused when I described the slur, the monkey line. His jaw twitched. That was the first flicker of emotion I saw in him. "And you're certain that's what he said?" he asked. I didn't mishear a damn thing. "And you identified yourself?" Immediately. Held up my badge. He wasn't interested. Captain Bryce exhaled. "He'll be suspended pending full investigation. Likely termination." "Likely?" I asked, voice sharp. "You have video footage. You have witnesses. Nurses. A full statement. What more do you need?" He hesitated. "To be honest, Dr. Ellis, what we need is time. Union procedures. Paperwork. He's got friends in the department. We're not pretending this is clean." That's when it hit me. Even after knocking him out, even after proving I wasn't a threat, even after saving lives while that man spread hate, he still had people covering for him. Still had backup. But so did I. 2 days later, the story blew wide open. Not because of me, but because one of the nurses from the clinic posted her video on social media. She didn't just show the moment I punched him. She included footage from the security camera, zoomed in, clear audio, everything. The slur, the aggression, the swing, the collapse, all of it. It spread like wildfire. Racist cop drops racial slurs on black surgeon, instantly regrets it. Doctor fights back after racist gas station encounter. Head of trauma at Ridgeview Hospital floors cop with one punch. The media tried to dig into my life, asking for interviews, booking talk shows. I turned them all down. I wasn't interested in becoming a spectacle. But then something unexpected happened. A letter came to the hospital. Handwritten. No return address. Just 4 words on the front. For Dr. Ellis only. Inside was a photo, black and white. A black woman in scrubs from the 1960s. Her hair pulled back like mine. Her eyes fierce. A small note was paperclipped to the corner. My grandmother was the first black nurse allowed to treat white patients in this state. She endured worse. But she never swung back. You did. For her. For me. Thank you. That's when I broke. That's when the tears finally came. Not out of sadness. But because for the first time since that night, I didn't feel alone. I wasn't just a woman in scrubs anymore. I was a message. A warning. A reminder. And they had no idea who they tried to mess with. By the end of that week, I couldn't walk through the hospital lobby without someone stopping me. A janitor tapped his heart and nodded as I passed. An intern slipped me a folded note that simply read, "I see you." Even the chief of staff, a man who'd once told me I was too emotional for trauma leadership, shook my hand in silence. But what struck me the most wasn't the support. It was the silence from the other side. The side that had always whispered behind my back. The senior surgeons who used to comment on my tone in meetings. The board members who once suggested I dress less urban. The committee who needed more time to review when I applied for tenure even with a spotless record. They all went quiet. No apologies. No emails. Just silence. Like they were hoping the noise would die down and things could go back to the way they were. But I knew better. Because this wasn't just a moment. It was a shift. 3 days after the video went viral, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in nearly a decade. Marcus Devlin. Former Marine. Current federal prosecutor. And my ex. "I saw your face on every screen in DC, he said, voice smooth like always. And I couldn't not call. I didn't know what to say. We hadn't ended badly, but life and distance had drawn lines between us. Still, hearing his voice cracked open something I didn't know I'd buried. How tired I was of fighting alone. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm standing." "That's not what I asked. I'm surviving. That's what matters." There was a pause. Then a shift in his tone. "Maya, do you want to press charges?" The question stunned me. Not because I hadn't thought about it, but because I didn't think it was an option. Would they even take me seriously? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Normally. Maybe not. But now. With the footage, the witnesses, your credentials, your public standing? They can't sweep this under the rug. I exhaled. Long, heavy. I didn't punch him for revenge. I did it to stop what I knew was coming next. "I know," he said. "But that doesn't mean he shouldn't answer for what he did." Marcus offered to connect me with a civil rights attorney he trusted. Someone who didn't flinch when the word racism was spoken aloud in court. Her name was Clarissa Walton. Former FBI investigator turned firebrand lawyer. When we met over Zoom, she didn't blink once as I told her what happened. She just nodded, took notes, and said, "We'll file within the week." "What if they countersue?" I asked. "They won't. You broke no law." He did. And trust me, they don't want this going before a jury. Not with your face. Not with your resume. Not with that video. But not everyone agreed. 2 nights later, I walked into the hospital cafeteria to grab a coffee before rounds, only to hear 2 residents whispering near the vending machines. "She's weaponizing her identity," one said. "She assaulted a cop," the other added. Doesn't matter what he said. I didn't confront them. I didn't need to. Because 10 feet away, a nurse named Deshawn stood up, looked them dead in the eye, and said, "She saved 3 kids this week. What have you done?" They shrank into themselves and walked out. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to defend myself. That weekend, the department organized a closed-door meeting, supposedly to discuss workplace culture and community relations. I knew it was code. They wanted me to speak. To make this easier. To smooth things over before the media came knocking on their door for quotes. I showed up. In full surgical whites. Hair tied back. No makeup. No apology. When they handed me the mic, I didn't recite a speech. I didn't perform pain for their comfort. I looked every single one of them in the eye and said, "You all know me. You know what I've sacrificed to be here. And yet when a man called me a monkey and threatened my life, your first instinct was to wonder if I went too far." A few looked down. Others squirmed. But I wasn't done. I've stitched up gunshot wounds in babies. I've opened skulls of men who crashed motorcycles going 90. I've comforted parents as their child slipped away under my hands. I carry death and life with me every day. But you want to question my professionalism because I refuse to be dehumanized in a parking lot. Silence. I didn't throw that punch as a doctor. I threw it as a woman who was tired of begging to be seen as human. When I walked out, no one followed. And that silence. This time, it felt like respect. Clarissa filed the lawsuit 2 days later. The official charge, assault, misconduct under color of law, and violation of civil rights. The city responded fast. Too fast. They offered a settlement, high 6 figures, a public apology, and the officer's immediate resignation. No court. No press. Just signatures. But I said no. Because this wasn't about money. It was about exposure. It was about letting the world see what happens when power assumes it can crush dignity. The officer, Derek Renshaw, finally spoke up. Through his lawyer, of course. They painted him as tired, provoked, confused in the dark. But no one bought it. The footage had spoken. The people had seen. And the courtroom wasn't going to be any kinder. Because what they didn't know, what they still didn't understand, was that I wasn't some lucky punch. I was a black woman raised by a mother who survived the Jim Crow South, trained by the top surgeons in the country, and hardened by a system that tested me at every level. I wasn't just defending myself. I was fighting for every name they never bothered to learn. Every scalp they patted. Every, "You're so articulate," and "You don't look like a doctor." I was fighting for the days I smiled while being overlooked, corrected, dismissed. And this time, they were the ones unprepared. The first court date was set for a Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. I arrived early, not because I had to, but because I needed to. Needed to feel the air, the silence, the weight of the building that had judged so many who looked like me before even hearing a word from their mouths. My attorney, Clarissa, walked beside me in a power suit as sharp as her reputation. Reporters had already started to gather outside the courthouse steps, cameras clicking like insects, voices calling my name as if I'd become something other than a doctor, other than a woman who had simply wanted water. Inside, the courtroom was cold. Not just in temperature, but in energy. Officers lined the wall, their badges reflecting the overhead lights. One of them, an older white man with a grey mustache, refused to look at me as I passed. Another gave me a barely perceptible nod. And I noticed. I noticed all of it. Then he walked in. Derek Renshaw. No longer in uniform, just a navy blue suit that fit poorly over his hunched shoulders. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller, too. Like someone who'd lost the one thing that made him feel taller than the world. He refused to meet my eyes. But his lawyer. Arrogant. Slicked hair, tight smile, every movement oozing the kind of practiced charm that only shows up when a man thinks he can outtalk the truth. The judge called the session to order. A black woman, Judge Catherine Morales. Sharp eyes. Braids pulled back into a neat crown. No expression. Just poise. Clarissa opened strong. No theatrics. No raised voice. Just facts. Dr. Maya Ellis is the head of neurosurgery at Ridgeview General Hospital. On the night in question, she was returning from a 16-hour emergency shift. She was approached without provocation, called a racial slur, and physically threatened by Officer Derek Renshaw, who at the time was both armed and in uniform. She acted in self-defense. And today, she is not only fighting for her dignity, but for every professional of color who has been told that their presence is somehow a threat. The opposing counsel scoffed, shaking his head as he stood. "This isn't about race," he said, voice smooth as oil. "This is about excessive force." Officer Renshaw feared for his safety. He didn't know who she was. She struck first. He was concussed. This woman, he gestured toward me, could have walked away. She chose violence. Clarissa leaned forward. He called her a monkey. The lawyer froze. Just for a breath. "We dispute that language was ever used." Clarissa turned to the judge. "We have video, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "Let's proceed." They played the footage. The courtroom fell silent. Every breath, every slur, every sickening moment of tension filled the space like smoke. Renshaw's voice played back. "Back off, monkey. That white coat won't make you human." Gasps. Even a few murmurs. One of the jurors, a young white woman, covered her mouth. When the punch landed, the video paused. Clarissa stood slowly. "What you just witnessed is not aggression. It's not even retaliation. It's the human response of someone forced to survive yet another act of public humiliation and targeted hate." The judge recessed for lunch. Outside, the reporters swarmed. I didn't say a word. Clarissa handled them all. I stayed behind in a quiet waiting room with my hands folded and my breath shallow. That's when the door creaked open, and someone unexpected walked in. Lieutenant Marcus Devlin. In full dress blues. Former Marine. Federal prosecutor. And the man who once asked me to marry him under a tree in D.C. when we were both still wide-eyed and angry at the world. "Maya," he said. I stood slowly. "What are you doing here?" "You didn't think I'd let you stand alone in that courtroom, did you?" I tried to laugh, but it caught in my throat. He continued. "I've been watching from the back. Quiet. But there's something you need to know. That cop, Renshaw, he has a record. Internal complaints. Not just yours. 3 others. All buried." My stomach twisted. "You're serious?" "Very. And I've already sent them to Clarissa." "Why are you doing this, Marcus?" I asked. "You don't owe me anything." He looked me in the eye. "No. But the country does." The next day in court, Clarissa presented the sealed documents. The judge reviewed them in silence. Renshaw's lawyer turned pale. Objection. Irrelevant past conduct. But Judge Morales didn't even blink. Pattern of behavior is highly relevant in establishing motive. Overruled. That was the beginning of the end. Witness after witness came forward. A nurse. A grocery store clerk. A former high school student. All of them had stories. All of them had faced Renshaw's rage in silence. Until now. And suddenly, I wasn't the only voice. I was part of a chorus. By day 3, the courtroom felt different. Heavier. Like justice had begun to uncoil itself from the shadows. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. When they returned, I held my breath. "Do you find the defendant, Officer Derek Renshaw, guilty of misconduct under color of law?" "Yes." "Do you find the defendant guilty of civil rights violation?" Yes. And do you find that Dr. Maya Ellis acted in lawful self-defense? Yes. It wasn't just a verdict. It was a vindication. As the gavel struck wood, I exhaled a breath I'd been holding since the night he called me less than human. The judge turned to me. Dr. Ellis, thank you for your service to this city, and your courage to stand firm. Court is adjourned. Renshaw was led away without handcuffs, but without pride. And me. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I stood, tall, whole, unbroken. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes, it speaks in the calm, unwavering voice of a woman who just refused to be dehumanized. The trial was over, but the world was just waking up. I walked out of that courthouse into a city that suddenly looked different. Not because the buildings had changed, or the sky was clearer, but because people finally saw me. Not just as a doctor. Not just as a black woman. But as someone who'd stood her ground in front of a system that was never designed to protect her. And still, I wasn't prepared for what came next. The news didn't just report the verdict. They dissected it, praised it, argued over it. I became a headline. A symbol. Some called me a hero. Some called me too aggressive. Others tried to twist the narrative, claiming I'd provoked the incident by looking threatening in scrubs. I laughed at that one. I was 5'7", unarmed, with a hospital ID badge clipped to my chest. But somehow, to them, my blackness alone had a pulse of danger. The hospital's PR team tried to manage the flood of attention. They wanted me to give an interview, just one. They'd pre-screen the questions, frame it as a healing conversation. I said no, because I wasn't interested in healing their image. I wanted something bigger. Change. A week later, I called a staff meeting. Not just for the neurosurgery department, but for the entire hospital. Nurses, janitors, EMTs, residents, administration. I had one agenda. Truth. We filled the auditorium. I stood at the front, no microphone, just my voice. I know you've seen the news, I began. I know many of you have reached out privately with support. Thank you. But today, I'm not here as your colleague. I'm here as someone who knows how it feels to be excellent, exhausted, and still treated like a threat. You could hear a pin drop. I've worked beside you, saved lives with you, bled and cried and celebrated with you. But I've also been watched more closely, questioned more often, corrected in meetings when I wasn't wrong, told to calm down when I was just firm. And some of you, yes, in this room, have stayed silent every time. A few people shifted uncomfortably. One nurse looked down at her shoes. A surgical resident tightened his grip on his pen. I'm not angry, I said, holding their gaze. But I am done pretending that this institution is colorblind. Because it's not. And neither is medicine. The system sees race, loud and clear. And now it's time we stop whispering about it. That was the beginning of what came to be called the Ellis reforms. I didn't plan the name. Someone in HR coined it after our first policy meeting. But the work. That was mine. We launched a mandatory anti-bias training, not the soft, shallow kind with pamphlets and vague apologies, but workshops led by professionals who didn't flinch at the word racism. We reviewed hiring pipelines, promoted more staff of color to leadership, created anonymous reporting systems for workplace microaggressions. And most importantly, we listened. I opened a private inbox for hospital employees to share their stories. Within 48 hours, it was full. One message read, I'm an ER nurse. A white surgeon once told me I only got into the program because of diversity quotas. I laughed to keep the peace. But it killed me inside. Another said, I'm a janitor. Been here 17 years. Patients assume I'm dangerous when I mop near their rooms. Security follows me. Every time. Reading them crushed me, but it also fueled me. Because I knew now that this wasn't about one punch. It was about centuries of silence. And it wasn't just the hospital. 3 weeks after the verdict, I was invited to speak at a medical ethics symposium at Howard University. I almost declined. I was tired. But something in me said, go. I stood on stage in front of rows of young black med students. Their eyes wide with belief, fear, hope, all at once. I didn't ask to become the face of anything, I told them. But the moment chose me. And if it ever chooses you, you don't have to be ready. You just have to be real. A student raised her hand. Dr. Ellis, what scared you the most that night? I paused, then said quietly, that no one would believe me. She nodded, tears in her eyes. That's what I fear every day. After the talk, a crowd gathered. Some just wanted to shake my hand. Others whispered stories of discrimination they'd buried for years. One young man simply said, thank you for punching back. But I didn't smile. Because that punch wasn't the point. What mattered was everything after. That night, I sat alone in my apartment for the first time in weeks. The noise had died down. The calls stopped ringing. The adrenaline was gone. Just me. And silence. I thought about my mother. About how she'd raised me to speak properly, walk with grace, work twice as hard, and never ever show my anger in public. But maybe, just maybe, she'd be proud I did anyway. Then, a knock. I opened the door. It was Marcus. No words. Just a look. And then, without asking, he stepped inside, wrapped me in his arms, and said, you're not alone. I rested my head on his chest and whispered, I know. But it still felt good to hear. I thought it would end there, with the verdict, with the reforms, with the silence finally broken. But real justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It lingers. It stretches. It tests you again and again to see if you meant it. 2 months after the trial, I was asked to speak before the city's police oversight committee. Not a ceremony. Not an award. A hearing. They were considering a bill, the Community Accountability and Conduct Act, meant to overhaul how racial bias complaints were handled inside the department. I didn't want to go. Not because I was afraid, but because I was tired of being the story. But when Clarissa called and said, if you don't speak, they'll let the union bury it, I knew I didn't have the option of silence. The room was packed. Rows of officers sat with folded arms, their eyes sharp and unreadable. Some wore body cameras, still switched off. Behind them were community leaders, lawyers, activists, parents, and nurses. A strange silence pulsed through the room, the kind that comes before a storm or a shift. They called my name. I stood, walked to the front. No notes, just memory. My name is Dr. Maya Ellis, I said clearly. I'm the head of neurosurgery at Ridgeview General. And on March 3rd, I was called a monkey by an on-duty police officer in public, threatened, and forced to defend myself. A few heads tilted. Some jaws clenched. I kept going. This isn't about one officer. It's about a culture. One that allows hate to put on a badge and call itself authority. One that punishes truth-tellers more than it punishes abusers. An older officer in the front row rolled his eyes. I paused and locked onto him. You can shift in your seat all you want, sir. But I've held a child's brain in my hands while police officers joked about his gang tattoos. I've watched black men be brought into my or with broken ribs and bruised wrists from a routine stop. Don't tell me it's not systemic. A murmur went through the audience. They tried to reduce me to nothing more than an angry black woman who got lucky with a punch. But I am not a fluke. I am a product of survival. And I will not stand by while the next Maya Ellis doesn't walk away. I sat down to silence. No claps. No nods. But I could feel the ground shift beneath their feet. Later that week, the committee voted 9-1 to advance the bill. The lone no belonged to the same man who'd refused to look at me when I testified. He resigned 2 weeks later. Still, victory felt strange. Like standing in the aftermath of a storm with a house still standing, but cracked, windows missing, foundation damp. The media eventually moved on. Another scandal. Another tragedy. That's how the cycle works. But I stayed. I kept showing up. Not because I was brave, but because I had to. 3 months after the verdict, I was walking through the pediatric wing of the hospital when I noticed a young boy, about 10, maybe 11, sitting alone in the hallway, knees hugged to his chest. I knelt beside him. "Hey, you okay?" He looked up. Brown eyes. Trembling lip. His voice was small. "Are you the lady who hit the cop?" I blinked. "I am." He stared at me a long time. Then whispered, "My mom says you're not supposed to fight. But my teacher calls me names sometimes. And I don't know what to do." I swallowed hard. "You don't have to fight with your fists," I said softly. "You fight with your voice. With your truth. With people who'll stand with you." He nodded slowly. "I want to be a doctor too." I smiled. "Then promise me something. When they doubt you, don't shrink. When they push you, don't disappear. You belong in every room you walk into." He grinned, wide and bright. "Okay." That boy reminded me why I'd kept going. Why I'd stayed loud, even when the world begged me to soften. Because someone always watches. And someone always follows. Marcus and I eventually found a rhythm again. It wasn't romantic. Not right away. Too much had changed, and we'd both built new lives in the cracks left behind. But there was comfort in his presence. He checked in often. Sometimes just a text. "You're not alone today." Sometimes that was all I needed. And sometimes he brought coffee to my office and sat quietly while I charted post-op notes, the weight of everything unspoken resting gently between us. One night, months after it all began, he asked me a question I hadn't expected. "If you could go back to that night," he said, "would you do it again?" I didn't even blink. "Yes," I said. Because he wasn't just reaching for his belt. He was reaching to erase me. Marcus leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly. "Then I'm glad you reminded him you're not that easy to erase." In the end, I didn't want statues or magazine covers or speaking tours. I wanted safety. I wanted truth. And I wanted little black kids to walk into a hospital and see someone like me in charge, and never question if they belong there. That was my justice. And if you're reading this, if you've ever been talked down to, passed over, silenced, know this. You are not invisible. You are not less than. And when the moment comes, because it always comes, don't be afraid to punch back. In whatever way the world forces you to. With your voice. With your truth. With your refusal to be reduced. Because sometimes, justice doesn't wear a robe. Sometimes, it wears scrubs.